Live from Courtney's. Welcome back to the Osho episode 417. Wow.
I messed you up when I tried to guess 474.
I'm nervous. This is my first political interview.
This is not my first, but we're early on, in the early days.
How much media have you done?
I've done a round of just kind of initial calls with media, nothing like formal or official. You never really know. You hear people on the other end of a phone start typing out when you say something dumb, and when you think you say something impactful, you hear radio silence. So I've had like a primary call with folks in D.C. and New Jersey, but nothing formal. We'll see.
Do they ever catch you off guard with a question, though?
I mean...
Because again, like, you have to be on your A game with some of these interviews. Like this one, you could be on your Z game.
Oh, yeah. I mean, okay. I know where you live. I know where your parents live. So if something bad were to happen in this interview, I could figure it out. I'm your ride home right now. So I just outed you as that. Jack is back in his hometown without a car and relying on chauffeurs. But have I been caught off guard? Yes. Our first, not so much by media, but I haven't done a whole lot of media just yet, but the first kickoff event we had, it was like 100 family, friends, mutual connections at the golf course here in Long Valley. And I said, let's do an open Q&A. And a couple of my advisors and team said, that's a terrible idea. You've never done that. You don't know what the questions you're going to get are. And I said, no. These are going to be the friendliest people that I could possibly have. They're going to be softball questions. And hopefully we won't dive into any of these on this podcast. We can, but I don't think you want to. Off the bat, it was, John, what's your stance on gun control, drugs, abortion, like just down the list of the most hot
the stuff
topic.
That could really end you.
The stuff that you stand up there and say, I hope I don't have to answer a question on X, Y, and Z. And not because you don't want to talk about it, because it's an answer that takes longer than 30 seconds. And one of my favorite politicians says on issues like that, whether it's women's rights, women's health, race, guns, you name it, he goes, that's a kitchen table issue. That's not a podcast, a tweet, an interview. It needs a meal and much longer than one question when someone shows up at a town hall and tries to kick your teeth in.
Well, we'll try to make this as easy as possible on you.
I love it.
This is a monumental episode for me because John Henry Eisman III, he's the first podcast guest I've had that was actually a former babysitter of mine.
Yes. I don't know.
Like once upon a time.
Once upon a time. I don't think I was hired back that many times. I think, to your point, your parents favored my sister more than me. But, yeah, we grew up across the street, across the cul-de-sac in Long Valley, New Jersey.
And it's crazy because I don't think we ever really truly got to know each other. You were 5 years older than me. Again,
so much older than you.
Kid and then hang out with them.
No, we were just the age difference when you questioned why you needed a babysitter, and I questioned why is anyone asking me to babysit. But no, it is wild to think about everybody we grew up with. Now, I, as you know, moved back to Long Valley once COVID broke out, and how many people kind of descend back on their hometowns when that all broke out. You get to figure out what everybody is doing. And to your point, I think we were talking about, I forget what episode it was, the Jordan Belfort episode, when you say that's when my DMs got flooded. People said, oh my gosh, you're doing a podcast. And that's when I think we got in touch. We started talking. I was telling you about what I was planning at that time behind the scenes last January about this campaign. And here we are.
It's been, 10 months in the making?
10 months.
That's unbelievable. Well, probably a lot more than that. I've known about it for 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's our first meeting, quasi-official meeting was last October. It was October 24th. Gathered, I think, 10 friends, advisors, mentors in a room and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. I, have always kind of had this itch and seen how important politics is and government is, but not been so sure if I should step in, when I should step in, what I should do. Moved back to Long Valley, saw what was happening in New Jersey and said, all right, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to change this? And more or less was trying to get people that would talk me out of doing this into a room and say, no, there's a million other places where you could jump in, you could work with your nonprofit, you could start out somewhere lower. But sure enough, here we are running for Congress almost a year later.
You said it was almost like a running joke in your family that you'd eventually get involved in something like this.
Yeah, I mentioned I think my first step into politics was Long Valley Middle School class representative, and not that role carried a ton of responsibilities, but from then on it was the running joke. Mostly when I would get in trouble, it would say, well, your political career is cooked. And then came back a couple of years ago now and was talking to, like I said, family and friends, saying, it looks like DC is in need of some new blood, some new energy. Our state, as you know, having been one of the people to leave New Jersey, I think we only lead the country in people leaving, whether it's people going to college elsewhere, people retiring, not being able to afford it. And I said, it looks like someone needs to jump in. And sure enough, everybody says, we always knew you'd jump in at some point. And I said, I never knew. And if it was going to happen, I was planning it on happening 30 years down the lane, not right now, in my late 20s when I had a nice life going for me in Brooklyn, New York, other than everything else going on in the world.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to talk to you about, and that'll be the premise of this interview, you running for Congress, the why behind wanting to do this, like you said, your first little instinct of it at Long Valley Middle School, right here in Long Valley. But, you talk about, people leaving, you left for a few years. We kind of talked about it, you left for college, you knew you were going to come back. But, you went to UNC Chapel Hill. You had a year at Pepperdine out in California, too. Completely different vibes, completely different atmospheres.
I think people ask this question in a ton of different forms. They go, what was the spark? When did you first jump in? When did you think you were going to do this? When did you know it was going to be Congress right now in this fashion? And I think the answer to that question, and why I love long-form discussions and not a 3-sentence answer on why on your website, is because you can talk about all three of them. And, a lot of it is the experience I had in the last 10 years not being in New Jersey and realizing what it means to be from here, why we all get pulled back at some point in some way, shape, or form. As you mentioned, spent time in California, North Carolina, Europe, worked in Central America, worked in London for a little bit, and then the last 5-6 years in New York City. That seeing what's going on in the world and taking for granted your nice little backyard was always part of it, and thinking that the craziness of politics over the last 10 years in California and in Brooklyn and around the world will never impact my hometown, my backyard, and sure enough, here we are. So that was kind of the why that built up over the last 10 years while I was, I worked in finance for a bit, media and technology for a bit as well. But there's also a story that I haven't shared much about, one of the first sparks of, getting the confidence to just speak in front of people and, have the audacity to do something like this was my high school history teacher, who's still close friend, advisor, kind of a key part of my campaign, pulled me out of class one day after I gave a speech and knocked on my desk. He said, "Hey, we need to talk after class." I said, "Did I plagiarize something? Am I in trouble?" And he said, "John, that was a really great speech. I don't know if it's that you're a good speaker or I am just so tired of watching people give graduation speeches that are boring, but you should run for class president next year so you can speak at graduation." And I was jaw on the floor. No one's ever told me that. I was a quiet kid, when we knew each other all through high school growing up. And sure enough, did that, and that has been someone in my life that anytime I'm making a big decision, thinking about doing something, he always finds his way into my text messages, into my emails, saying, "Oh, what's going on, John? What are you thinking about? What are you doing?" So, I talked about the 10 years of getting me to this point. He's been a person that's pushed me over the cliff every time I think about making a big decision. And just having family, friends, people around you that encourage you to take a step that feels like it's crazy.
Yeah, because you talk about, you probably thought you were a quiet kid. Maybe other people didn't think that. But for you to go after this, you needed all those experiences leading up to now, right?
Yeah.
You need to know how to network. You need to know how to connect not only with your audience, but with people that, you're trying to buy into what your belief is, what your vision is moving forward for not only your campaign, but what you have, your ideas are.
Yeah, and there's so many things, like starting a podcast, like broadcasting, like everything you've done, there's not a textbook on, hey, do these 10 things to build, I'm not trying to build a career in politics, but to get elected to Congress in this district, in this year, under these circumstances. There's no playbook. So having not only the experiences, but people around you and mapping out the things you've done and having a little bit of confidence to say, I've failed enough. I've been successful enough in different places. Let me string this together and put a campaign together. And it's the last thing I did professionally was worked at a startup. And during the pandemic, just prior to the pandemic, I was the 8th hire. Our founders built the company to just shy of 60 people, raised a ton of money in the heat of a pandemic. And that was sort of the last of those experiences where every day there's a different challenge. There's something that needs to be done. You're about to run out of money. You're desperate to find customers. You're desperate to grow. You're desperate to figure out what the next message is, what the next thing you need to build is. And that is translated almost one for one into this campaign.
That's incredible, man. And again, just you having the, I guess, intuition to say, like, okay, I'm going to do this, going back to what we were talking about, leaving for college, next 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, it's different for everybody. And to come back and have certain experiences, like, what did you major in? Because again, like, very business minded, know how to talk to people, know how to connect with people.
Yeah. I think I went into school, people always say, did you have a grand plan to get into politics? Maybe when I first got out of high school, I was a political science major. I thought I was going to go right into JAG school or right into law school, become a JAG officer in the Air Force because my cousin had done that. He went to law school, and that seemed like a good path. Transferred schools from Pepperdine to UNC, studied abroad, and quickly it became not what do you major in, but how do you graduate in 4 years with a degree at all. So I eked out, I say, with a business degree from UNC's business school, which was a great time and gave me a ton of tools, none of which were all too sharp, but a ton of different things I could do, and then ended up in finance right out of school.
So what do you take away from Southern California and then like right in the heart and soul of UNC in North Carolina down there? Two completely, again, different atmosphere. Again, coming from Jersey where it's go, go, go in the tri-state area, Southern California where it kind of can be all over the place, from my experience anyways, and then down south where things are kind of very laid back.
Yeah, looking back at my college experience, I tell people now, I couldn't have painted a better picture of what I wanted. I never would have said, I hope I go to California, like it enough to stay there, make friends, and kind of commit to a year there, and then transfer, and then study all this stuff. I never would have known that at 17, 18. But looking back now, I got a taste of the West Coast, thinking I was going to be this West Coast guy, this big surfer. I remember Googling schools by the beach and seeing that Pepperdine was a Christian school, and my dad being a pastor, I said, they'll definitely let me go there. That's largely how I ended up there after a lot of financial aid and scholarships that made a school like that possible, and liked it enough. But to your point, coming from Jersey, California is a very different place. Mm-hmm. Small Christian school in Malibu, California, within Southern California, is an even further different place. So started looking at other places, wound up at UNC, kind of had the classic college experience, big sports, big school, not too far from home. So loved every bit of it. Still like California a lot. The more I go out there, the more I am confident I love to vacation there. And I'm very glad I have houses and couches to sleep on, friends that I met in my time there. Don't know if I'll ever live there full time. It, to your point, is very, very, very different than New Jersey.
Because, there's a lot of locals, but there's a lot of people from all over the place. Like, I lived out there for one summer.
No one's really from California.
Exactly.
They came from somewhere. Or
when I was there, it was 4 kids. It was New Jersey, Chicago, Iowa, and Indiana. You know, like, people are from all over the place. They try to get away from the cold.
Yeah, and I remember I spent Easter one year in San Clemente, California. We drove down from Malibu, and trying to explain where I came from, a place, I think our town was founded in the 1700s. We have buildings still standing from the 1600s, or structures at least. And driving through California, it's the highway and then kind of this prefab development, and that's everything. Like, there's not as much character, there's not as much history. And I don't want to say that rubs off on the people because some of my best friends are from California, but there is a distinct feel. There's a distinct feel of California, and people know that who grew up there, but it's definitely not New Jersey.
So what do you think makes New Jersey more, not like authentic in a say, but like more traditional? Like, people are kind of, I don't want to say more well-rounded either. I don't make people out there seem stupid. I still live out there.
We can't bash on California. I'm flying out there in 2 weeks.
I still live out west, so. They're great. They're great people.
Well,
you know what? Why New Jersey? You know, you fell in love with it at a young age, and you knew you wanted to stay here. Now,
yeah, people. When I was in New York, when I was in California, and Jersey people have this weird pride in the state, and then people spit back at us with, "Oh, you're last at this, you're last at that, you're the armpit of the United States," and I take that personally, and that's one of the reasons I'm jumping into all this, to kind of make New Jersey no longer the butt of a joke. But the other day, I had an event, and right after I spoke, someone made a beeline for me, came right up, and I said, "Oh boy, this guy's going to have a really tough question," or I said something wrong, or he's just crazy. And he's now become a friend and a big supporter. I had an event at his business just this last weekend, and he starts framing this question, which I thought was going to be, why should I stay in New Jersey? You know, kind of the why do you love New Jersey? What's the character that keeps us here? But what he ended up doing was just describing to me why he loved it. And I think that's it. Whether you're in California, whether you're in New Jersey, everybody has their own why of, this is why I love this place. This is why it means so much to me. This is why I don't want to leave. California, it's a lot easier because it's beautiful all the time. New Jersey, you at least need to justify the winter and the miserable weather for about 4 to 6 months. But so many people have been here, like we were talking about, my family on one side has been here since before the Civil War. And that comes with these really deep roots. And we have these I think we have close to 600 small towns in New Jersey that have their own governments, their own firehouse, their own police departments. It's super unique to New Jersey. And it's something we all love, that you can live in a place where, you know, we can go out to the Applebee's for lunch, you recognize people, but it's still not this middle of nowhere place. It's these small communities with character, but you're also an hour away from New York City. You could be in DC in a day, Boston, you could be in the mountains, you could be on the beach. It from my opinion, and people in California may laugh at this, but I think it has everything.
So what specifically did you see? Because again, like, your family jokingly knew at some point in some way you'd get involved on some level. Mm. What was it that clicked? Like, what was the thing that kind of pulled the trigger for you? Kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, in a sense.
Yeah, there were a couple almost like lines in news interviews, YouTube clips I've watched, and just moments in time over the last 10 years that pushed me into it. I remember Chris Christie, one of the last conservative governors in New Jersey, two-term governor, was speaking at the Harvard School of Education, and his last line talking to the graduating class was, I can't encourage you guys more to get into, one, either education, what they were all about to get into, but step into politics. Because if we don't have people like you, and I am very far from a Harvard graduate, but he was speaking to Harvard graduates and said, if people like you are not willing to put what they have on the line, because in one sense, folks like us who grew up in large part at this, intersection of opportunity, not so much privilege, but a really good life, great families, great communities. In one sense, you have nothing to lose because you have this great surrounding, but you have a lot to lose because, Jack, you have a podcast, you have a broadcasting career. If people like us, normal people, aren't willing to step into the ring and stand up for what you believe in, what you think's right, changing the trajectory of, your town, your state, your country, then we're completely sunk. So that was one moment, and then I think if anyone over the last 2 or 20 years hasn't watched the news and gone, what's going on in the country, you haven't been watching the news. So that was just an overwhelming wave from the last 10 years to say our representatives, whether they're in Trenton in New Jersey, state capitals around the country, or in D.C., don't really represent us. They more so represent this status quo of government and leadership. I mean, in New Jersey, the average state politician has been in Trenton for 20 years and then often goes to run for Congress to hope to spend another 20 years in government in D.C. and has had no, substantive life experience outside of this government bureaucracy.
And you talk about it so eloquently because I feel like you were called to do this at some point, right?
That, or you just stick your head in the sand of politics and government for the last year. Last July, when I really kind of flipped the switch and said, hey, I think I'm going to do this, you immediately realize how little you know about this world, about what's going on. And it's like being an athlete, right? Yeah. You don't want to step up to the plate and strike out. So you practice, you prepare, you train. So a lot of it is that. And I think that's the energy that politics and government needs people, young people that may in one sense be inexperienced, but have the hunger, drive, and devotion to say, I'm not going to fail for me, for the people I'm representing. So that's, I think, where your perception of eloquence, so thank you, comes from.
No, I feel like a lot of people kind of took COVID as a way of like, I'm either going to be sitting here and doing nothing, or I may as well not reinvent yourself, but to put everything you have into something.
Yeah, I'm either going to get really good at making bread, buy a puppy, or run for Congress. I chose the third.
So let's kind of dive into some of the other things that you did leading up to this that didn't quite click, like you were passionate about, but, you know, because I know you worked at Columbia Records for a little while. I saw you met John Mayer. That's how I knew you worked at Columbia Records. You know, working in other business ventures, like what do you take away from those experiences that kind of breathed into this?
Growing up, I had no idea what I wanted to do and went to school. That first career decision you make, right, is maybe where you go to school, what you study, whether you go to college or not, whether you jump right into work, which I had a lot of friends that did that and had a lot less student debt than I did. And I remember saying to my parents, what do I do? What should I major in? And my dad's answer was always economics, get an economics degree. It won't open any doors, but it won't close any either. Then go work on Wall Street for 10 years and you'll be fine.
Right.
I had no idea what that meant until I met people that quote unquote worked on Wall Street, and I started trying to figure out how I could get into this world and ended up interning for a big bank in New York and then getting a full-time job there. I worked in derivatives trading, which I was there were guys on my desk with PhDs from some of the greatest schools in the world, and I was here from this state school, barely got out of an undergrad business program. So I was there for just shy of 2 years, and that was... You hear all these nightmare stories about investment banking and finance in New York. For me, it was like learning how to work. No one ever teaches you how to show up to a 6:15 a.m. meeting and get not berated, but have to really stand up for ideas and plans. And you're not drawing out grand strategies at 22, but how to get a lunch order right for 30 people and run across the city and get it in time. So you learn how to be reliable, you learn an attention to detail, and then, as I say, I made a classic millennial overcorrection from investment banking to entertainment. And after I knew I didn't want to be in finance for the rest of my life, I started looking at what are my passions, what am I interested in, one of them being music, which is still probably one of my biggest passions. I can't play a note, but I'm very good at listening to it, and I love going to concerts. So tried to find someone that would resonate with my story, this disgruntled investment banker that wanted to work for a record label, and luckily found a guy who got spat out of accounting in his 20s and had been working at Columbia Records for close to 30 years at that point. And I joined this team that was doing what I call the most boring job at a very cool company, which was saying no to record deals that would come through. So someone would say, hey, we found Lil Nas X or Dominic Fike or Rosalia, which were some of the deals that I was lucky enough to work on. We need to pay them this much, and we can only get these many albums out of them, and we need to sign the deal in 3 days. So we were running financial, legal, and strategic analysis on these deals. And then if they were big enough, there are some artists that you wouldn't believe that we had to go all the way up the chain to the board of directors of Sony and get approval to cut $40 to $50 million check for an artist. So I was there for 2 years. Like you said, I met two of my favorite musicians and a ton of other really interesting stories there that we could talk about for hours. Springsteen, Mayer, Lil Nas, and then jumped into a software startup. I met a guy named Shane who was building this company. It was, I think, 10 people when I joined, and he said, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to work with some of those creative brands in the world and rethink how they work with media, photo, video. We work with some of the big sports leagues, some of the big pro teams on, helping make their content more valuable and easier to work with. So I was there for a couple years, and my first job was really learning how to work. And then my last job before jumping into politics was gaining the confidence to do any and everything else.
Again, going back to getting people to buy into what your belief is, because it's easy to have all of these, not just, beliefs and things that you want to put in place, but you got to get people to actually believe in the person.
Yeah. I think the scariest, most exciting, and humbling thing is asking the people that you've known your entire life, or people, some of your best friends, admitting to them that, hey, I have this really big idea. I think I'm going to do it, and here's how I'm going to. And them stepping up and saying, yeah, I'm in, I'm behind you, how can I help? Because it would be not easy, but to throw up an Instagram post or file some paperwork and say, hey, guess what? I'm running for Congress. And have all of your friends kind of show their phones to everybody else and go, can you believe he's doing this? Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to fall flat on his face. So to go to your friends and say, hey, please help me not fall flat on my face, and start to build this momentum of, starting with family, starting with friends, building this nucleus around what you want to do, and then word starting to spread and networks starting to build. And all of a sudden you have a team of people who have hundreds of years combined of experience in fundraising, in public policy, in marketing, content, media, and a year in now, and just a couple of days into formally campaigning, you say, how the heck did this happen? And it's just thinking critically about where you've been, what you've done, who you've met. I mean, that's how we end up here, right? 10 years after the last time I saw you.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And like you were kind of telling like some of the guys you met, working at the record label. Like that was always the one thing I definitely knew about my neighbors from across the street. Huge Springsteen people.
Yep. You would hear it from the backyard late at night, and then we would hear your brother with his band in the backyard on the late nights that we weren't playing Springsteen.
Every time I hear Thunder Road, I think of
that's got to be coming from the Eisman's pool.
Yeah, I think Eisman. As soon as I hear that, I'm just out listening to Thunder Road or Born to Run out in the desert in Arizona, and that's all I think about.
What is Arizona's perception of Springsteen, New Jersey? In Arizona, who's bigger, Bon Jovi or Bruce Springsteen?
Well, I think Springsteen has a bigger reputation because I think a lot of people, I'm not necessarily one of them, I'd have to look into him more, but think Bon Jovi is kind of full of himself.
Okay.
What's your take on that?
I'm not going to diss Bon Jovi like that. I got to live in Jersey.
Phenomenal musician.
If you want to come on the show, call anytime. No, I had a friend of a friend who went to school with his son who runs a wine brand now, but I just always grew up on the Springsteen side of that.
Yeah.
And there's not much of in the Venn diagram crossover between Springsteen and Bon Jovi. There's very few people. I mean, the Jenkins, our other neighbor, they were diehard Bon Jovi fans, and that was almost like a property line between the two of us. We were Springsteen people, they were Bon Jovi people, and I still, secretly go back to some Bon Jovi songs, but so much of not just the music I grew up on with Springsteen, but the artists that have come out of Springsteen, whether it's Jack Antonoff, who now has a song with him in the last year, The Killers, Brendan Flowers, who now has a song with him in the last year. I think that COVID, you talk about your podcast kind of blowing up during COVID and getting to talk to some crazy people through Zoom and around the country. I think that happened in music too, where Springsteen was probably not sitting at home, but puts a song together with Jack Antonoff, puts a song together with Brandon Flowers, and some of my favorite songs, not just of the last year, but of both of their catalogs.
I'm going to have to listen to the one with Brandon Flowers, because I'm a huge Killers guy, too.
Yeah.
I did listen to it was Bruce, Eddie Vedder, and Tom Morello, the Highway to Hell cover that they did.
Anything Tom Morello, Springsteen. One of the last stadium shows I saw Bruce at, Tom Morello was playing with him. Ghost of Tom Joad is one of my favorite songs. I saw Tom Morello play that in a basement bar in New York City in front of like 100 people when he put his last solo project out. But I'm going to butcher this story. Brendan Flowers tells it much better than I could. The Springsteen song that they did was Dustland Fairy Tale, which is a Brendan Flowers killer song that he wrote close to 10 years ago now about his parents' meeting. And this last year, Flowers gets a text that just says, hey, we should do Dustland sometime. And he goes, and it's signed Bruce. He goes, is this the Bruce? He texts Springsteen's son, who he was friends with, and goes, is this your dad's number? And sure enough, it was Bruce. They did the song. Now the Killers are touring. I just saw them at Terminal 5 in New York. They played that. It was unbelievable. They have a great video out for it, too. It definitely puts a Springsteen twist on what was a great song on, I think, the Killers' third album, and a much more rock song, Jersey feel, if you will, to to a Vegas band.
I always associated Springsteen's sound to Jersey.
Yeah.
Even like the newest record he put out, Ghosts, I think is a phenomenal song. I just think like, oh, E Street Band, that's Jersey.
His memoir, if you haven't read it, read it. 2, I know you're flying out of the East Coast tomorrow, but next time you come back, enter the lottery for Springsteen on Broadway. See it. It's on Netflix.
He's still doing that?
He's still doing it.
Unbelievable.
And if you haven't, it's on Netflix if you haven't seen it. And how he explains where his music comes from, which in some sense they're all folk songs. And Jack Antonoff described a folk song as explaining and painting the pictures of experiences of other people, your mother, your brother, your dad, your family, only to reflect the story and the feeling that is actually within you. So Springsteen does that well. The Killers say that their music is British pop inspired, run through the filter and given the flash of Vegas. And I think that's true about Springsteen. Whether it's Seeger that inspires him, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, it's just filtered through this really strong Jersey filter.
I didn't realize that there was kind of a Springsteen Jovi, not like rivalry, but
riff. We'll call it a riff.
A riff.
I don't know. I think Jovi was probably a decade and a half after Springsteen, so not intergenerational, but a different crowd. The great Jersey Shore cover bands cover Jovi and Springsteen equally, so I think it's equal opportunity in New Jersey for the both.
So what was it like meeting him for the first time, given that he's such like an idol in the Eisman household?
Definitely. So I texted my dad the morning of, because it's not a security thing, but our office was close to 200 people in New York. I think we had another 50 in LA. And in the Sony building, there's 4 record labels stacked on top of each other. And if people would get word that their favorite artist was at the label upstairs, you would just walk up the stairs and be in the lobby when they came, shake their hand, say hi. So they would programmatically lock the doors to some of the staircases and entrances. So you hear Springsteen's coming. I text my dad. He goes, "When's he coming? Could I drive in?" I go, "The doors are locked. You're not getting in here." And you never think you're going to be nervous because you tell yourself, "I'll just be cool. I work here. We basically work for the same people, right?" He makes a lot more than I did. But you walk up to him, and less so with a few other people I've met, but you just feel instantly when you're in front of him like this sense of nervousness, because you've only ever seen this person on a stage in front of 80,000 people at Giant Stadium or on Broadway, and suddenly you're face to face and you're like, what the heck do I say to this person who's written hundreds of songs, dozens of which have been the soundtrack to the last 20 years of my life, and you feel like anything you say, you're going to sound like an idiot. So a lot of nerves, but if I meet him again, maybe I'll be less nervous.
See, he probably didn't think that. I'll give you a story, because you're the Springsteen house, Jenkins are the Jovi house. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, we've become the Dave Matthews Band house.
You guys are definitely the Dave house.
I am not a huge Dave Matthews guy, and I'm going to tell you why.
I've never wanted to. I'm not an anti-Dave Matthews Band fan, but I've never really wanted to follow them. But by following the O'Hara children on any form of social media, I know exactly what's going on in the Dave Matthews Band circle.
Yes. Again, it's a different sound. Declan has fallen in love with it, and he's ran with it. You asked me about some of my favorite interviews. We talked, like, Rob Schneider was great. Tommy Chong, I think, told the most unique, interesting, badass stories I've ever heard in my life. Worst interview I ever did, Dave Matthews.
You interviewed Dave?
I tried to. It was an innings festival. So Tempe, Arizona does this innings festival where they team with Major League Baseball. Last year, again, it was Dave Matthews, it was Weezer, Death Cab for Cutie, a lot of those bands. Dave Matthews was the headliner, and I got a press pass to, write a press release for the event, which was great. Got to interview some great, like, MLB Hall of Famers, which was awesome. And then Rivers Cuomo from Weezer. Insanely intelligent guy. Totally out of my class with that interview. But Dave Matthews, again, unorthodox fella, And I always say, I feel like I've told this a few times on this show, but I didn't get the memo that we weren't allowed to record audio with our phones, which I thought was kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
So I had to handwrite everything in order to put it on print online.
Yeah.
So I put my phone like relatively close, probably as close to where that microphone is to your mouth. And I'm like, Mr. Matthews, I had like 3 things prepared because it was going to be quick. Immediately slapped my phone out of my hand, face down on the concrete, cracked.
Is that the story of how your last phone broke?
The entire backside of my phone cracked. I literally just got it replaced 2 weeks ago. He's just like, no, we don't have any of that. And then his publicist was like, didn't you like get the memo? You're not allowed to do that. I'm like, Rivers Cuomo was cool about it. He let me record. I'm like, what the hell just happened? And, he got the 3 questions out of the way, and then he's like, all right, see you guys. I'm like, that was the worst interview ever. And then, surely enough, I tell Declan and, like, my dad about it, and they're, as the Dave Matthews guys.
No, there's no way. What did you do wrong?
Exactly. Did you piss him off?
Yeah.
Was it your body language? What the hell happened? I'm like, Dave Matthews is just, he's not a nice guy.
Have you been on the West Coast in Arizona, a concert guy? What have you done? I mean, in COVID, what have you done for fun is one question, but I know your family's a big concert family. What are you doing?
Oh my God. I was FaceTiming my mom the other day just to check in, and she's just like bouncing up and down. She's like, we're at Dave in Saratoga. I'm going to have to call you back. I'm like, okay, whatever. They go to there already been 8 shows this year. That honestly, oddly enough, Dave Matthews Band was the last live show I've been to. We're going to a few,
pre-pandemic
it was literally 2 weeks before. This was end of February, early March 2020. We got a few shows coming up. I've been fortunate enough to interview bands out in Arizona. They're coming around. Need to Breathe.
Okay,
is probably
I saw
one
that
of my favorite guys. I interviewed them a few weeks ago. They're coming out next week. So, we're getting back into it. Guns N' Roses was here.
And now the artists are starting to move around. You're going to have people come through town all the time.
Right. And, they go on their West Coast swings and then Midwest, wherever they're going. But, yeah, I honestly have not done it because, again, I have invested 100% of my time into this. You were talking before,
what do you do for fun?
Seriously, I golfed a little bit. I snowboard a little bit out there. Now it's just making content.
Yeah.
It
now
sounds
that people
selfish,
are
but I'm trying to grow this,
Yeah, I think the other thing we talked about was when I came back home, and in New York, there's this not pride or there's this level of, it's okay to be a semi-workaholic, which I don't mean to say that's not a thing for people who have a serious problem with that, but in New York, it's normal to go to work at 7, leave at 7, 8, go out, with friends, go to a dinner, go to an event till 12, wake up and do it all over again. And then you come back to, where your family lives. My mom's a school nurse. My sister's a teacher. My dad's a pastor. My brother works remote for a startup. And you try to live that New York pace and that New York life because you love what you do. And it's not just my job. My sister, same thing. She'll be at the reason why we're filming here is she will be at school for hours after because it's what she loves. But it doesn't feel like, I'm working all the time. You don't go around and brag and say, I got to work this weekend. You go, I'm talking to this person. I'm doing that. I'm going here. And it doesn't feel like you're working 12 to 18 hours a day. It feels like I get to do what I love for 12 to 18 hours a day.
So how do you take your own experiences and try and not necessarily get in the minds of other people, but to try and understand how they navigate their lives? You talk about your passions and you get to know people through whether it's these events, fundraisers, other things that you're doing to try to get to know the community. How do you try and get inside their brains and kind of say okay, I know how to make this a better place because I understand it from your shoes?
I don't think it's trying to get inside people's brains. I think more or less there's something that all of us have in common with each other, right? Yeah. It's just a matter of time until you find it. And like I said earlier, I was sort of the black sheep of my family by going to California, living in New York the last number of years, spending time in Europe and South America.
I get it.
And you know it well. But what that did was it gave me so much experience, not only deep experiences, but just this broad range of things I've done. I remember being in Guatemala running a missions trip, and someone said, you went to Pepperdine? You must know this guy, Kevin. And I go, yeah, we were in the same fraternity. Yeah. And the more you do, the smaller the world gets. So and that, to my point about not saying it's getting into people's brains, it's almost being a human. And the more human you can be, the more you can do, the more you can interact with people, the more you can do stuff like this, get your voice out, get your message out, and meet as many people as possible, the world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's not uncommon for me to be at an event or at a dinner or just run into someone on the streets and within a 7-minute conversation find something that feels like a small world connection, but it's, it's not that crazy.
I know, that was like always the phrase, like, oh, what a small world. And like the more and more you get out there, like not in like an entrepreneurship mindset, but just like getting to know people from all over the place, getting experiences out west, down south, back east. Like you get to know, and everybody kind of knows each other because everybody's kind of in the same mindset. Everybody wants to branch out.
Yeah, and you always attribute it to, I would love to run the math on some of these quote unquote small world scenarios. Like you are running in a lane of podcasters, broadcasters, Southwest media people. And you think, oh, what a small world I'm running into. And like, not really. Like we've both been curated into this pool of people one way or another. And you're also like, you'll walk out of doing this podcast now with a bit of a mind for politics and think, oh, I just talked to John in New Jersey who's running for this. I'm seeing politicians everywhere. And you're just turned onto it and tuned into it. But I'm trying to think of some of the best small world scenarios. I was at a Coldplay concert once and bought the tickets super last minute. And this is sort of small world of small world. It was supposed to be their last concert in New York. I just moved to the city. And I was like, oh, crap, I forgot to buy tickets. It's Coldplay's last show. Now they're still touring, so that's a bit of a bummer. Buy the tickets last minute on StubHub, and I'm in this section just to the right of the stage, the lower level of MetLife Stadium at that time, and everybody's got these wristbands on. And I'm thinking, what is the deal? I'm the only one without a wristband. It's this whole section. So I talk to the people in front of me. I go, what's the deal? I start kind of making friends with them and figuring out if this is something cool. They go, oh, yeah, we're out on a boat in the Hamptons, and we hear this little girl talking to her dad going, hey, Daddy, where are you playing this weekend? He goes, oh, I'm playing at Giant Stadium. And they all turn their heads. They go, who are you? He's like, oh, my name's Chris. I play in this band. It's called Coldplay. And all of them are just so jaw dropped. Yeah. And me, I'm saying I would have recognized Chris Martin in a second, but you don't think, to what I was saying, context. Like you don't think I'm going to see Chris Martin on this catamaran in off the coast of New York. And he goes, oh, I would love to see you guys at the show. My kids love you. They hang out all day. Gives them these wristbands to the last show at Giant Stadium, this after party at the Gramercy Hotel. So immediately, I'm at the concert alone. I got to work the next day, but I say, I'm going to this after party. It was across the street from my apartment in Manhattan. And sure enough, I start thinking, they're going to leave. They live in Long Island. They're not going to go to this. They leave early to make sure they can get to the after party. I start walking around the concert. I'm going, hey, are you guys going to the after party? If not, I would love to go. And I'm just shameless about it. I'm a big Coldplay fan, want to be there, think it's going to be the coolest thing I've ever done at the ripe age of 22. And everybody is just saying, I'm on Chris's management team. I'll lose my job if I do that. Yeah. I'm Chris's cousin. I haven't seen him in 10 years. I'm going to the show. So I'm one of the last people to leave the stadium. No luck. And I just say, I'm going to the Gramercy Hotel, going to see what happens. And sure enough, walk to the front door. This guy's walking out. I go, hey, man, any chance? He goes, you want my wristband? Here's 50 of them. Grabs a whole stack.
No way.
He was running the door. I walk right in. I met Chris. We talked about the Springsteen song he covered at the show. Hung out there till like 4 a.m., went to work the next morning.
See, that's amazing. Because, that's lesson 101, networking 101 in a sense. Just you never know. Ask the question.
Yeah, just ask. And that's we were talking about how do you jump into broadcasting to podcasting? Is there this big line you have to wait in? And you said something similar to what I've learned about politics. Yeah, probably, but I didn't find the line or I didn't get caught up in it because I knew who I wanted to talk to. I knew what I wanted to do. And I just put the call in. I just made the ask. And even when someone said no at first, I didn't take it. I'm now making some philosophical advice on a Coldplay party. But anyway, you don't take the first no as gospel and that, you weren't meant to do this.
Right.
At some point, you keep knocking on doors. They keep getting closed. You say, okay, maybe I'm meant to do something else. I'm probably not meant to be a broadcaster, or the audience will tell if I'm meant to be a podcaster. But you just keep knocking on doors.
Learn why it was a no right now. Don't just say no and be like, I guess it wasn't meant to be.
Exactly.
It was a no for a reason. how are you going to turn that no into a yes next time? That's funny, like seeing Chris Martin kind of like out of context. You don't see him on stage in front of 100,000 people. I was at a First Watch diner. I don't know if there's First Watches out here. Have you ever heard of First Watch?
You West Coasters, now you're becoming a West Coaster because I think you're doing this. There's no such thing as a chain diner. When I was in California, people would say, "Oh, we got to go to a diner." Like a Denny's. I go, Denny's is not a diner. With all due respect.
Sucks.
With all due respect to Denny's
sucks.
A diner is the River Star down the road or the TikTok, one of the more famous ones in Jersey. A diner is owned by Greek and Italian families on the East Coast. You guys, there's no chain
It's
diners.
authentic, I will admit that. But First Watch is phenomenal.
All right,
you got to check it out when you go out in a few weeks. But I was getting breakfast. This was around spring training time, so there's 15 teams in Florida, 15 teams in Arizona, where I was.
You guys are the Grapefruit League?
So close.
The other one.
We're the Cactus. Those other guys in the Grapefruit League.
50-50
down
shot.
In Sunshine State. But I had like some coupon, so I ordered like 3 different meals.
That's how scorned by the Mets I am that I just try to block out all baseball knowledge, but that's for a different subject. I don't want to talk yet.
I don't want to.
I know. I don't want to talk Yankees, especially with you. So let's just press on with your First Watch story.
So again, I had like 3 meals. I was in the middle of bulking season. You know, I grew up a really skinny kid, so like as soon as I started working out, I'm like, I got to put on a ton of weight. And again, I feel like Christianity is. Correct me if I'm wrong. You come from a Christian household.
I do.
Christianity as a whole, and again, I don't want to offend anybody here, but like it's way more profound out west, I think, than it is here.
I'm hard to offend. I like that you put profound on it. When I went to school in California, Christian school, and would say that my dad was a pastor, I like to call myself a pastor's adult, not a pastor's kid, because a pastor's kid, a lot of baggage comes with that. So my younger siblings have that. I don't. When I would talk about my dad's church, I'd say, "Oh, it's a pretty big church, you know, anywhere between 400 and 500 people." I'd say, "That's not a big church. That's tiny." And religion and Christianity on the West Coast is almost, it's not few and far between, but the communities of faith out there get really big. And, you know, if you're in Orange County, California, you know, all of Riverside is going to the same church. All of Newport Beach is going to the same church. There's not, like there is in New Jersey, 600 different small towns and 5 different churches for every single small town. So in that sense, I think it is, and when someone is a member of a certain church community or a certain faith community, they let you know it on the West Coast.
Yeah.
The East Coast, with everything, is a bit more buttoned up, including religion.
Okay. So again, like that perfectly answers what my opinion of it is, just from my point of view, from my perspective. But again, like I'm at breakfast at a First Watch, and I see this couple, you know, praying across the table from me. I'm just some kid with just scoffing down pancakes, and then this just omelet, this enchilada, whatever. And they're just like, "How old are you?" I'm like, I think I was 19 at the time. I'm like 19 years old. It's like, that's a lot of food right there. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got to bulk up, you know, skinny kid, whatever." And the waitress came by. She's like, "Is that all? Like, here's your check." And the guy just goes, "No, that's on me."
Huh.
Like, he put him on my check. I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's really nice of you." And in the back of my head,
You were eating like the world was ending. He's like, something's up with this guy.
So he's like, "Yeah, it's on me. Like, you keep doing what you're doing, man." I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much." And in the back of my head, I'm like, I kind of recognize this guy. You know, it's like one of those situations where like this guy is out of his element in a First Watch, kind of low key, just, you know, in a polo and jeans. Who is this guy? And on his way out, again, like he's praying at the table before he eats his meal, and then as soon as they get up, him and his wife, and they're leaving. And there's a bunch of guys in Dodgers hats asking for autographs and stuff. It was Dave Roberts, the manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, who paid for my meal. He's the guy who, like, infamously stole second base for the Red Sox in Game 4, and then they came back. I have a podcast with him tonight, so I get to tell him that story. Yeah, it's
again small world. We talked about it. I just remembered that you had an episode with Chad Michael Murray too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I only went Malibu Presbyterian, a church out by Pepperdine. I would go to an Easter service there, and I saw him there, a bunch of other celebrities, and it's again. So when you see people outside of their element, you're like, you're not supposed to be at a diner paying for my meal. But once and I grew up a massive. I don't say I was a massive One Tree Hill fan because people will rip me to shreds, but I did have an older sister.
Everyone went through one.
Who, when she would watch it, I'd lean in and go, that was when pre-Shazam, just as iTunes and Napster were coming out. I mean, legal Napster was coming out. And at the end of the episode, every night it was music brought to you by Manchester Orchestra, Citizen Cope, bands that are still some of my favorites today. And I would always tell my sister, that's why I'm watching One Tree Hill with you, not because I care about the drama. Secretly, I still and always have loved One Tree Hill. But it's some of the music on that show, the music on the Hills, too. I still have Spotify playlists of
anything with a great storyline, sign me up. I don't care what it is. What was that other one, Riverdale? That's
never seen Riverdale.
Great storyline. Yeah. People will beat you up for it because you're a guy and you're supposed to be into guy stuff.
People beat me up. We were talking about How I Met Your Mother. You've had Ted and Robin on this show, and two of my favorite, Ted, not Mosby, Josh Radnor is one of my favorite writers, authors, and actors. That show, you say you've watched it 4 or 5 times just because you throw it on at night. If I were to count all the times I've just thrown How I Met Your Mother on as background noise, I'd be up in the dozens of times I've watched the whole thing. I think I have 5 times at least that I have said, okay, I'm going to start How I Met Your Mother from episode 1 again. And I've always been on that side of the camp instead of Friends. That's what I get chewed up for. I don't think I've ever watched a full episode of Friends.
Listens to the Puzzles theme song.
Yep. Robin Sparkles songs.
Sandcastles in the Sand. That's hilarious. See, we're getting the personal side of John Eisman today.
For the next 2 years and maybe thereafter, all you'll see is me getting chewed up in the news or tweets, and hopefully someone scrapes this up and finds a bit more character and background on me.
So to tie a bow onto all of this, because again, you got to be all over the place. Again, we're 4 days into your official start to your campaign, and you're doing events. You know, you're heading to 1776 by David Burke after this.
Yep,
going out
to Morristown tonight. Chance Healy, good Long Valley guy, friend, huge supporter of the campaign from before day one of the other people that pushed me off the cliff. And yeah, it's crazy. In a lot of ways, this has been in the works for the last year and a half, but you can't formally campaign until you're a candidate with the Federal Election Commission, all this stuff. But everything is now rolling. And, all my stuff is standard social media channels, johneisman.com, John Eisman on everywhere, just for folks to watch along and see what's up. And really the timeline of now, the O show, until John elected to Congress, is the next 3 months is just a blitz of getting my name out there, fundraising. We always hear politicians beg for money and fundraise, but fundraising not just to spend money frivolously, but to kind of redefine how campaigns are run, who's hired, how you put media out, how you efficiently spread messages. So that's now to call it January. January to April is, getting in front of people physically, getting the vote out for the primary, which is, party, in the same party, kind of nominating the best candidate, which will be in June. And then the general's next November. So what feels like a lot of time, more than a year from now until November 2022, the last year has gone like that. So just trying to get in front of as many people as possible, get this message out, get as much feedback as possible. So if you guys see anything or hear anything that you hate, you disagree with, blow me up on my email and my Instagram DMs. Just let me know, because we're kind of building the ship as it sails with, trying to bring as many people on board as possible.
See, and that just proves that this is not night and day. Like the first time I heard about you potentially running for Congress was all the way back in January.
Yeah.
Here we are 10 months later in October talking about it. You're talking about plans the next 12, 15 months. Like, obviously that there's plans in motions right now for what you want to do with what your vision is. What's the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan?
Yeah.
Because, again, you're a smart guy. I feel like you're thinking way down the line.
In one sense, there's enough to think about in the next 2 years that's as much line as I can really think about right now. But, 5, 10, there's, like we talked about earlier, it's audacious to think that anyone, whether you're 27 or 87, could be a congressional representative, any role in our government, and try to be this expert representative of close to 800,000 people that live in, a good corner of New Jersey, and talk and vote and try to have opinions on issues, anything from national defense to space. So that's enough work to be done. And in terms of a 5-year plan, should I be lucky enough to get elected, and things are going great right now, so we're really confident that that's going to be the case. It's going to take not just 2, not just 4, not just 6, 8 to 10 years to really get your legs under you, to understand how DC works. And this is not to say that you can't have impact in 6 months by the tone and the discourse of your campaign, 2 years in a congressional seat. But I think people like to hear that you're committed to the seat you're running for the change that you're trying to bring. But also, you don't want to build a career there in Washington. Ben Sasse, who's a senator out in Nebraska, says that Mr. Smith goes to Washington, a movie with Jimmy Stewart, who's right above you from the It's a Wonderful Life scene. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington would be a really crappy movie if he went down to Washington and then got really tied into a bunch of lobbyists and special interests and never came home. So one thing that you hear a ton of younger candidates talk about, and I think everybody should be talking about, is term limits and getting people down to D.C., back to where they came from after they've made the change that they want to. So hopefully not in D.C., for too long.
So the last question I want to ask you, the most important one I'll probably ask you, is why you didn't go with Guy instead of John Henry Eisman III.
Guy.
Because that's who we knew you as your entire childhood.
Guy has been the neighborhood name. Guy's been the family name. My sister, whose house we're recording this from right now, is a couple years older than me when I was born, called me Sweet Guy because she couldn't pronounce John. I don't know how much more difficult one is than the other.
It's one syllable.
One syllable, but we won't say anything in court. At some point, the Sweet got dropped, and I was just Guy. And even today, people on my campaign team, volunteers who grew up with me in church or around my hometown say, "Can I still call you Guy? Can I call you John?" I go, whatever's more comfortable.
Yeah.
I stuck with the legal name John. I'm not Italian, so I don't think Guy would stick all too well. Maybe it'd be good branding in New Jersey, but we're going with John from here on out.
John Henry Eisman III.
Yeah. It's a mouthful. You can pick parts of that.
GHI3.
Yeah.
Though if you put that as an Instagram handle, it'll be I. So
yeah.
You're not the fourth.
No.
You're the third. So I'll give you the floor, open camera right there. What's your last message to these people? And we'll put your contact information, johneisman.com, available on the screen right there.
Like I said, would love for any and everyone from across the country, across New Jersey, to get involved with what we're doing. Give us feedback. Stay up to date with what we're doing. The goal of this campaign is really to bring a generational shift to Congress, create a categorical change in the quality of our leaders, and bring a voice to our values, whether they're Long Valley values, New Jersey values, Arizona values, but the value of real people, not just representatives, down to D.C., and build states where we can live and hopefully rebuild a country that can lead.
And what's your next event?
Next event is late October here in Long Valley, New Jersey, so you can head to our website, check out the events, and sign up for that, get all the information you need.
John Henry Eisman III.
Jack O'Hara. It's been a pleasure.
This is the most updated studio we've had thus far.
Great.
So shout out to Courtney. Thanks for this. This is episode 417 of the podcast. We're presented by Mayweather Boxing and Fitness. Get your membership now. Hit it.
See you guys.